Hello and welcome to Lord of the Board. Today we are going to be doing a review for Root, the Marauders Expansion. Root, the Marauders Expansion is here and it is beautiful. Now, I'm sure if you're watching this, you might be thinking it's a little bit weird that I'm actually doing a review on this because, you probably already know that I love this game, Root, and it's pretty much impossible for this expansion to be a miss for me. But for some reason, when I did a poll on my page on what you guys wanted to see the most, it was this. So we are going to be doing a review on Root the Marauders Expansion. But I am going to be going into this and letting you know that there might be some extreme bias here. But what exactly does this expansion bring? Well, it brings in two different factions. We've got the Keepers in Iron and we have got the Lord of the Hundreds. This also comes with 4 Hirelings, which Hirelings are essentially a kind of mini faction of sorts that actually is supposed to help lower player counts feel a bit more full. And the expansion also comes with advanced setup cards, which are essentially there to be used in order to create a more balanced setup experience, but this is definitely only recommended for experienced players of the game. But enough of what is in the box, let's go ahead and look at how all of these things work, starting with the Keepers in Iron. Now, the Keepers in Iron are relic-seeking knights, and their entire goal is to send denizens of the woodland to pull relics from the forest. These relics come in 3 different types, being jewelry, figures, and tablets. And they also come in values of 1 through 3. Now, to score the relics, the Keepers must recover them at way stations that match the relic's type. However, if they don't rule enough clearings of the suit that they are actually recovering in, it'll actually hurt their retinue. Now, this retinue kind of works like the Erie's Decree, but less turmoil and more chances to lose cards along the way. Also, it is what determines your actions. However, you add to it during your evening, making the Keepers constantly planning for their next turn. And then we've got the Lord of the Hundreds, which are essentially led by a warlord with a banner, and I truly don't believe it gets any cooler than that. Now, there are the first faction since the Vagabond that can interact with the ruins, which is something that I really enjoy about them, and they love stashing those items in their hoard to enhance their action economy. But stashing those items in their hoard also limits what moods the warlord can choose. Now, speaking of moods, this kind of feels like the Duchy's ministers in a way. Only you have access to every single one of them at the beginning of the game, but can only have one active at any one given time. And in addition to that, you actually have to change it in Birdsong every single turn, and as the game goes on, you're going to be limited on which moods you can choose depending on what items are in that hoard of yours. Now, the Warlord scores a certain amount of points based on the number of clearings that they rule with no enemy pieces in them. And then we've got the Hirelings. Now, the Hirelings are kind of the answer to the game's biggest issue, lower player counts. These Hirelings are mini armies that represent the woodland factions that can be influenced throughout the game. Now, the Marauder expansion contains 4 such Hirelings representing factions from the base game of Root. And whenever you add Hirelings to your game, you're going to be adding 3 randomly, and depending on the player count, you are going to demote a number of them. Now, your promoted and demoted, these are each going to have different abilities throughout the game, but something to keep in mind is that the promoted side is usually going to have physical pieces that can be manipulated by all the players. In fact, they always do. And then the demoted side sometimes doesn't have any manipulation of physical pieces and just provides the owner with a special ability throughout the game. Now, this box comes with the Forest Patrol, which has essentially pieces all around the board, just like if the Marquise de Cat was in the game, only it gives you ways to control them, move them around, and attack with them. And their demoted side essentially gives the player the ability to use the field hospitals. Then we've got the Last Dynasty. This is just a bunch of birds that go around and bully everybody, and they have to move and then attack. And it's really rude, and Honestly, pretty darn fun. And then their demoted side is the Bluebird Nobles, which give you the Lords of the Forest ability, which means that when you're tied for presence in a clearing, you still rule it. And then it also allows you to, at Birdsong, score 1 point for every 3 clearings that you rule. And then we've got the Spring Uprising, which essentially comes with this adorable little uprising dice. These uprising warriors are going to be springing up around the map, and in order for you to attack and remove them, you actually have to discard a card matching the clearing that you're battling in, kind of like how the sympathy works for the Woodland Alliance. Now, the other scary thing is that these actually have the threat to remove themselves and everything in that clearing, just like when the Woodland Alliance does a revolt, so it's very, very thematic to its inspired faction. And then the Rabbit Scouts give you the guerrilla warfare ability that the Woodland Alliance have, essentially getting the higher roll in defense. Super, super awesome. And then we've got the Exile, which gives you a way to basically give the items that you craft over to the Exile to enhance its action economy. You can be flipping these in order to move and attack with the Exile throughout the game. And when they are doing combats, they're going to start actually losing those items as well. So it's kind of a whole balance there. The nice thing is that you can use those crafted items that you're giving him to actually score an extra point throughout the game. And it's a very fun element to have, kind of a vagabond light in a game without the vagabond at those lower player counts. And then the demoted side is probably one of my favorite demoted sides out of all of the hirelings. It allows you to take from the ruins, and I think this is such a cool way to kind of fill in that gap when you don't have an actual vagabond in the game. Having a faction able to really manipulate those ruins, I think, is one of the coolest things ever. I absolutely love the Brigand. It is just such a fun design. Now, how these work mechanically is that you're going to be having 3 hireling markers on the 4, 8, and 12 spot at the beginning of the game, and when a faction passes or lands on one of these, they are going to be rolling the control die. Now, if you're in first place, you're only going to be gaining the yellow pips or gold pips, and you're going to be gaining that number of control markers on a hireling. That's basically going to determine how many turns you actually get that hireling. Then you flip that hireling marker and place it at the bottom of your board. This is going to remind you to remove one of those control tokens from the hireling at the end of your turn. Now, once you remove your last control marker from a hireling, you then have to actually pass that hireling to another player. So in a 2-player game, you're basically just passing these back and forth. Now, that player is going to be rolling the control die, and depending on their position, either if they're first place, they're only going to be getting the gold, or if they're not first place, they're going to be getting all of the pips on the side, red and gold. So you'll see that throughout the game, players that are in first place should be getting those hirelings for a little bit less time, and then the players behind are going to be getting them for longer. And in higher player counts, the whole passing mechanic, you're usually going to give it to the player who is last on the score track, or who is in a bad position and you know that they're not going to be surging up the score track here soon. It's honestly that simple to play with these hirelings. It's a very, very clean design and one that really adds a ton to the game. And then we've got advanced setup, which gives a whole new way to set up route. Players are going to be drawing 5 cards instead of 3, and then they're going to be discarding down to 3, which really creates a lot of interesting opportunities throughout your route games. It's really fun because you're going to be grabbing these advanced setup cards, you're going to be randomly choosing one more than the number of players that you're playing with, and then you're going to do a draft where players are going to take turns grabbing one of these setup cards and immediately setting up on the table. There's this whole new mechanic called homeland clearings, which essentially just means the clearings that you're starting in, but it doesn't actually have anything to do with the rest of the game. There's no other crazy rules. But one of the things that it does is it gives factions opportunities to start not in the corners. For example, the Marquise de Cat actually has 3 homeland clearings, and they can choose that to be anywhere they want on the board. The Erie Dynasty can start on any edge clearing. It doesn't have to be one of the corners. This opens up so much different opportunities and a lot of different strategic options. And if you read closely, some of these cards change up how the faction starts, and it actually buffs them up a bit. And it's really, really cool to see that in these advanced setup cards. It's not that much to learn, and it changes the game so much for players willing to play a more competitive and interesting version of Root. Now, how exactly does it feel to play this expansion is the next thing that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to start off by talking about the Lord of the Hundreds, because I think that this faction truly changes the way that people are going to play this game of Root. I mean, they are the most aggressive faction now within the game, constantly battling, constantly spreading around the map. And one thing that I fear, and I've already kind of seen, is that the Lord of the Hundreds, when people don't really know how to play against them or as them, they might see that the Lord of the Hundreds is a little bit overpowered. But trust me, if you play more, you're going to start finding those weaknesses in the system, and I truly believe that they're not overpowered, but more so that they are easy to pilot, and they force players to play so much differently than they're used to, which is just more aggressive Root, really. There is so much more combats and battling in games that contain the Warlord. And I just love the fact that when this faction is in the game, you can truly feel that kind of presence. And the Keepers in Iron are thematic and puzzling, and they honestly are right up there with Lizard Cult in terms of complexity. I think this faction is going to be taking quite a bit for players to get a hold of, but once you actually learn how to pilot them, once you learn how to exploit their abilities and really puzzle through collecting those relics, this faction is so extremely satisfying to play and be able to really win games with. It is one of those things where you'll find yourself hoarding all of these relics, and then you drop them all off on a way station and get quite a load of points at once. It just feels so satisfying to play as the Keepers in Iron. Now, when you're playing games with the Hirelings, I definitely can see that it is a very different experience depending on the player count that you're using them. You can feel the pressures of them so much more in those lower player counts, and at the higher player counts, it's a little bit overcrowded at times, and also you're using mostly the demoted abilities of them, and so it's just going to be kind of special powers to add along and through the game. And it really does change up how the game works, especially in those lower player counts. You're going to be looking for a more chess-like experience for the 2 and 3 player modes, where it's going to be you gotta make the right decisions at every step of the way in order to overpower your opponent or opponents. And it also kind of brings a more kind of political air to the game. It gives more depth to something that originally kind of felt like it lacked a little bit substance in those lower player counts. It adds that kind of political feel for some reason, where you're kind of gaining control of different pieces, using them, trying to manipulate them in the best way possible. But then we've got ad set. Now you can see a huge difference with ad set on certain factions, specifically the Corvid Conspiracy, also the Lizard Cult, and the Marquise de Cat. All 3 of these factions actually got kind of buffs within the advanced setup mode. For the Corvids, starting with a face down plot that they can actually flip up on their first turn and finally have a couple extra points. This actually gives them a better chance at winning the game, definitely balances them a bit. The Lizard Cult also being able to start, for one, in any clearing that they want, so that they can match the cards in their hand. That's already a huge buff, and I am excited to see Lizard Cult players getting a little bit better with this advanced setup mode. The Marquise de Cat being able to set up in 3 clearings of any of their choice, and also starting with a couple extra cats to help in that early game pressure. All of these changes are so welcome, and it is so cool to see the designers really try to kind of add subtle balance changes to these factions, and you can feel the difference when you're playing. When you're playing with advanced setup, you definitely feel a bit more creative, and also having the 5 cards at the start of the game and then discarding down to 3 helps pretty much every faction tailor their strategy a bit more. Now I'm about to go into my final thoughts on this expansion, but before we go any further, please drop a like as well as subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Something as simple as commenting down below saying, hey, I love the work that you're doing. Stuff like that is so helpful on keeping me wanting to make videos. So please definitely take some time to do that, but let us get into those final thoughts now. Now, starting off with those two factions, these are absolutely excellent. I absolutely love both of these factions. I think they are genius designs. I think the rats especially are one of the cleanest designs that we have seen probably since the Corvid Conspiracy in terms of just kind of overall play. They just flow very, very nicely. Now, the Badgers have quite a bit more text. I don't think that that's a problem. In fact, I actually like the Badgers more than the rats, I would say, so far. The Badgers are extremely puzzly, and I absolutely love their whole kind of struggle of figuring out how to properly plan their retinue for the next turn. Having both two militant factions added to the pool, making a total of 5 if you've got everything root, is an amazing addition, and both of them are excellent. Now, the Hirelings are another feat that I am so excited about within the game, and though these Hirelings don't completely solve the two-player problem, they 100% make it a more fun experience and one that I want to be returning to more. Now, one of the biggest highlights for me has actually been the Hirelings at 3-player count, because before this, 3-player was actually my least favorite way to play Root, and now with the Hirelings, I would love to see a tournament with set Hirelings at 3-player, because I just think that it is such an engaging and interesting experience. I think that they can kind of be twofold, because sometimes I feel like they can come off a little bit like adding items to Smash Bros, where it's kind of a little bit wild and there are some crazy abilities popping off all around the map, but I just think that that is so much fun. This is such a good addition to the game at those lower player counts, and at those higher player counts it's like just zany and wild, but it's just more variability that we can work with throughout the game. More Root is just awesome, and that's really what the Hirelings are adding. Now, the best part of this expansion, though, to me, has got to be the advanced setup rules, because these cards, in my opinion, fix one of the biggest issues that I've always found with Root, and that was the whole setup. I just have always found it to be quite clunky and weird, having to look behind your board and follow the setup and the A, B, C, D, E. It was just really confusing, and I knew that they were going to run out of like ways to make that work. This advanced setup is the thing that Root needed to just elevate it to that next level. Root was already my favorite game, but now it's just even more my favorite game. Advanced setup also did, like I said, those balance changes, kind of helping out those weaker factions. Now, a quick note about the art and components in this expansion. Guys, there is never, ever a miss here. I mean, this is some of the most just best artwork in the business right here. Come on, people. I mean, look at this cover. It's gorgeous. And then on top of that, this inlaid pattern. Oh my gosh, the product quality in this, that nice linen finish on those cards. I mean, you can feel the quality on all of the cards in the game. Every single piece in this game feels meticulously crafted with such care. It matches the base box of Root, and every single expansion, every single thing Leader Games has done has been top-notch quality. And it's just this amazing combination with Kyle Farron's artwork that he's just able to bring this world to life. It is just perfect. I have nothing bad to say about the product quality as well as the artwork in the game. Now, one of the things that I really wish this expansion did include, but I know that they included so much already, but something that I really wish that they did include was new maps. I love how the Underworld expansion has the mountain map, which is very thematic with it. I love that it came with that, and I just kind of wish that this expansion came with a new map. However, it's pretty clear to see that this expansion goes along with the winter map, with the winter map kind of being on the side of the box there, and all of the promo pictures containing all of these pieces on the winter map. It makes sense. It's just a little bit sad. I wish they included some more maps. And my last possible negative are actually the names of these factions. I don't know, they just don't seem like they match with the rest of the names of the factions, and I think it's because all of the other factions have kind of a government or kind of initiative in their name, like the Corvid Conspiracy or the Underground Duchy or the Eerie Dynasty. And then we've got the Keepers in Iron, and I don't know what that means yet. You know, I'm still trying to figure it out. And then also the Lord of the Hundreds. I think that's awesome, but it just, both of these names just don't kind of completely flow with the rest of the names of the factions. Guys, this expansion is phenomenal at the end of the day. This is probably the best next expansion to get if you've got Root, the base game, and before that it was the Underworld expansion. I actually think this one is the next best one. You've got two factions that really change up the game. You've got the Hirelings to really fill in those lower player counts, and the advanced setup cards that just completely change up how the game is played. But guys, that is it for the Root Marauders expansion review. Thank you so much for watching up until this point, and I hope that you have a great day out in the woodland. Brew a cup of Root tea, find yourself in a nearby clearing, and sit down to play a game of Root. I'll see you there.